Oh, such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 40% off select styles, plus a free professional measure. Rules and restrictions may apply.
We've been talking about tariffs coming from the United States to Canada and attacking our economy for a couple of months now. Trump's tariffs will be devastating. We all know that. But Trump's threat to the Canadian economy is much larger than tariffs. Hello, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. And today we want to explore what Donald Trump is trying to do with the world economy, with the American economy. He gave a bit of a hint when he was speaking, out of all places, the World Economic Forum.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt. Under the Trump administration, there will be no better place on earth to create jobs, build factories, or grow a company than right here in the good old USA.
Trump is looking to lower taxes, bring in tariffs, expand oil and gas production, expand LNG, exportation. He's looking to unleash the economy. That is as big a threat to Canada as the tariffs will be, especially if we don't get our own act together. Today, we're joined by two economists on Full Comment. Ian Lee is a professor of economics at Carlton University, and Carlo Dade works for the Canada West Foundation as a trade specialist and spends an awful lot of time in Washington. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. Look, as I said, tariffs are a major threat to the Canadian economy, but I think that too many people in Canada, politicians or commentators, are missing the fact that Trump's looking at doing much more than just bringing in tariffs. He's looking at fundamental changes to the American economy and how global trade operates. And I think that is as big a threat as the tariffs. Ian, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts?
First off, I agree with what you said. About 5 days ago, I tripped across or fell across the paper by Stephen Marin, PhD economics, Harvard University, with Hudson Bay Capital Group for many years, and
now on Trump's Council of Economic Advisors,
and now the chief economist to the White House. Essentially, that's what the Council of Economic Advisors was. The agency set up by Richard Nixon many years ago. He was in the Trump. I did check it out. He was in the Trump's first administration in the Treasury, but it doesn't really matter. This 41-page paper, when I read it, I mean, it just hit me right away. I didn't have to get to the end of the paper. By probably the end of the first page, I realized, oh my God, this is stunning. Whether it is successful, I'm not getting into that. What they are proposing, and it's crystal clear, this isn't my interpretation or my opinion. It is very clear that they see the entire 1945 to present post-World War II architecture that includes UN, IMF, World Bank, WTO, trading organization, as an error that they want to fix. They're very clear on that. And we could summarize that as the Bretton Woods system, or sometimes it's called simply one word, multilateralism. All countries are equal. We all share the same views, and every country is treated equally, even if it's a big country like the U.S. or a small country like Canada. It doesn't matter. We all are subject to the same rules and on a level playing field. It is absolutely clear, with absolutely zero ambiguity, that President Trump and his people around him see this as a failed system that has caused great damage and harm to the United States over many, many years. And they're proposing a huge reform, and the tariffs are merely one tool in a whole quiver or arsenal of tools designed to completely redesign the international economic trading currency regime system.
Carlo, do you share Ian's thoughts on what they're trying to do, or the viewpoint they're coming from is a bigger shift than we might have expected before?
Certainly. I agree with the both of the analysis here. And we've written about this at Canada West Foundation, I think starting a couple of years ago. So we've been doing a deep dive on the America First movement think tank component, the economic thinkers, former government officials who have left and gone to the think tank world, academics, etc. And yes.
And think tanks are massive in Washington. We have them, like Canada West Foundation here, but they play a very much larger role in public policy in the United States.
We do not have think tanks like the Americans have think tanks. We have, half a dozen people at Canada West. CG is probably the Center for International Governance Innovation is probably on the scale with American think tanks, but we just don't play in the same league. We don't have think tanks with 50, 60 fellows and staffers and million-dollar budgets. But
if you've walked their offices, they're gorgeous.
Some of them. Some of them are shabby. Some of them are shabby like us. But
you've been tracking this for a bit then.
Yeah. So, and just to your last point, take Project 2025. It's described in Canada quickly and unfortunately incorrectly as a Heritage Foundation project. This is a project Heritage Foundation has undertaken before, but it's not just Heritage. It's 50 think tanks and public policy organizations coming together. And just imagine the reach in terms of the intellectual power. I know some people will scoff at that statement, but a non-normative statement is there is intellectual power there. And the number of people that create a pool from which to staff an administration. So we've been following this very closely. And yes, your statement of what the Trump administration is up to is clear in plain text readings. But it's also not the first time the Americans have done this, or the second time.
You mentioned Nixon's tariff movement in your piece recently in the Financial Post.
Yeah, 1971. So this is completely unlike the steel and aluminum tariffs, which are what we're accustomed to in Canada. And this is part of the complacency. When the Americans say they're going to declare tariffs, our response is, okay, what are those jabronis complaining about today? Steel, softwood, aluminum, beef. What is their complaint today? And that was what happened with steel and aluminum. But in 1971, we woke up on a Monday morning in August to discover that Sunday night, the Nixon administration had imposed a 10% surcharge or tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. The language they used to explain why they were doing this is an almost exact replica of what we hear in today. The U.S. is getting ripped off. Foreigners are taking advantage of us. We're losing jobs that should be here in America. Everyone's ganging up on us. The rules are unfair. We didn't sign up for this. And we need to go back and fix this.
So, as both of you looking at it as economists, do the Americans have a point here? I mean, has the system tilted away from favoring them?
I agree with what you just said, but I want to disagree. Well, let me explain. I agree that Nixon said that, and yes, there was about the jobs and the negative impact on the United States and so forth. I think the argument being made this time is more sophisticated. In the paper, I keep referring to this paper because it's the most coherent and rational and lucid and analytical and scholarly exegesis. Trump is, of course, a typical politician, and he's disjointed, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're not supposed to be writing academic papers. So that isn't a put down at Trump. I'm simply saying I referenced the paper by Marin because it's much more structured and logical and coherent and systemic. In the paper, he actually uses the word geonomics, and he said what has changed is that we now have a larger understanding of trade and prosperity. It is not just near balance sheet balancing up. Do you have a balance of trade deficit or a surplus? He explicitly went on for pages about how the Americans have spent literally trillions since 1945. They spend $1 trillion right now a year. I've looked it up for DOD. But over the last 75 years, they've spent trillions providing the umbrella of security to all the Western nations and friendly countries.
Pax Americana.
And Pax Americana. And these countries, Canada's not the only one by any means, of the Europeans, Japan, South Korea, have all profited immensely from the rule of law as the United States, as the referee, my words, of the international economic system. And they're saying that when you factor this into the calculus and not just a mere adding up, your balance of payments, they argue that it's decisively negative for the Americans because, now I'm going to be colloquial again in my words, because all of these other countries have been free riding like crazy on America. And they are expressly in this paper, he says, this is part of the new revised deal we want. It will expressly require a rebalancing of and an analysis of the commitment of every country to ensure that they're at least at 2% defense spending and GDP. And they're saying this is part and parcel of the new international trade architecture. This hasn't been said before, to my knowledge, in such a formal, express way.
So yes, two things can be true at the same time. In essence, the core of their argument is the same. They have updated it and added some new things. But the core of the argument is the same. And the language that we hear, that most of your readers will hear, is this core language about unfairness, needing to rebalance. But Ian's onto something. There is one of the major additions within the America First movement, and there is no one doctrine. There is no one catechism that everyone repeats within the movement. So you're going to have different aspects or different sectors of the America First movement saying different things. But an important addition is the economic populist argument, I think, to which Ian is referring, that growth is not the be-all and end-all. We will take economic losses to have good middle-class jobs. Quality of work, quality of life in communities, human dignity is tied to work. And we want to bring jobs back. And this is what Canadians miss. We understand there'll be costs. We understand the tariffs will inflict pain. Our entire strategy is based on telling them something they already know, that pain's coming. But that is an important addition. It's not the only version of what's being said within the America First movement. And there's obvious pushback from the new Treasury and Commerce Secretary, Elon Musk, and others. But that is a very strong part coming from Orrin Cass and American Compass. So you have these different warring factions, but you're absolutely right. That articulation of the dignity of jobs and saving American communities that have been hollowed out is an important addition.
I was reading Robert Lighthizer book, No Trade is Free, and he spent, good little section of it talking about growing up in Ohio, in a middle-class town on the shores of Lake Erie, where the inputs for the Pittsburgh steel mills would come in, and how these places are being hollowed out. And you look at J.D. Vance's story of his upbringing. You got a lot of people around there who have similar stories. And they are, in my view, looking to put a wall up around America and bring back those middle-class jobs, those manufacturing jobs that at one point everyone just assumed, well, we can outsource that to China.
Yeah,
I agree. Very much I agree. Over the last 40-odd years of my life, I've driven hundreds of times on road trips across the United States. I've been in 46 of 50 states on road trips, not airports flying in and out. And I mention that because I drove into Cleveland, Ohio 1 week before Donald Trump was nominated in 2016. I went there not to see Donald Trump. I went there to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which it was on my list for a long time. And as I was driving in from across I-81, across the top of New York State and then Pennsylvania and then on into Ohio, I was struck by two things. Number one, thousands of Trump signs everywhere, and I don't think I saw more than 3 Hillary Clinton signs. So this would have been July of 2016, and I, in my naivete at the time, even though I've been driving through rural America in just about every state for many years, I said, no, well, Clinton's going to win, so there must be a mistake here because there's no Clinton signs. The second thing I noticed, if you drive, and this is my criticism of Paul Krugman, he's a brilliant man, but he's sort of, that argues, I don't understand how anybody can say it's not doing well in America, because in Manhattan, we're all doing very, very well. And it's my same complaint about the Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal elites. Get the hell out of Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto and drive into rural Eastern Ontario or rural Northern Ontario if you want to find out, well, Canadians really live, or into rural Saskatchewan where I've driven, or rural Alberta. And so my point being that the Republicans were onto this way before. The Democrats were clueless right up until this election about the elites in the coastal cities of San Francisco and New York and the big they've been doing very well. They continue to do very, very well. I would put it crudely and simplistically, the top 2 quintiles are doing very well. You want to know what's going on in the States? Look at the bottom 3 quintiles in middle America, flyover America, as some Democrats call it. That's where you're going to find out what's really going on. And yes, they have been hollowed out.
For Brian, I grew up, I didn't just drive through. I grew up in Philadelphia.
You're the resident Yankee on the podcast today.
We're reforming Yankee, trying desperately to lose that part of my upbringing.
Yeah, you've been in Canada, a year or two, a long time. But where did you grow up again? I forget.
So I grew up in Philadelphia. I didn't grow up in the suburbs. I grew up in a nice neighborhood in the city, but I went to school downtown. My mom put me on the train when I was in 4th grade, and I went downtown, and I walked through downtown, and I went to high school in the city. I saw Philadelphia on its knees when the city was utterly devastated, and the jokes about the Eagles fans, stoning Santa Claus. It was a time of desperation in the city, and the elites out in the suburbs are doing well, but the city, by and large, is on its knees. So I've lived a little bit of this firsthand. But let me caution, with the America First movement, there are those, Orrin Cass, I keep referring to him, and others who are really committed to this vision of trying to restore dignity to lives without dignity. But then there are other parts of the movement that are business as usual. Elon Musk, Zuckerberg. You look at the corporate tax cuts. 2 different things can be true at the same time, but they don't have to be reconcilable. And you've got these, I think, irreconcilable differences with America First. So we have to be careful not to attribute one manifestation of the movement, one manifestation of Trump's administration.
So, what Trump,
entire administration.
What Trump laid out the other day in the speech to the World Economic Forum, he said he wanted the price of oil to go down. He warned Saudi Arabia that it better go down. I think that was a strong hint. And so he wants oil to go down. He wants interest rates to fall. He wants to tariff everyone that isn't manufacturing in America. What does that spell for Canada? I mean, you deal a lot with the oil sector, in your job, Carlo. You know how important it is to the Alberta economy, never mind the Canadian economy, but oil drops and Trump tariffs it, they're not going to feel the pinch that we're all hoping they will to say, oh, please take the tariffs off. The price of gas will be the same. The inputs will be the same.
Yeah, so part of the strategy this time, again, as maybe a lesson from the Nixon shocks or maybe a new calculation, is that the Americans realize that there'll be economic pain. They think that they can survive short-term economic pain. Remember, Smoot-Hawley tariffs, the example everyone quotes, lasted 5 years. Steel and aluminum, which is completely, we shouldn't even use it when having this discussion, but that lasted a year. But the Nixon shocks, global tariff, all countries, rebalanced trade, those lasted 4.5 months. The Americans were able to bring Japan, Europe, Canada to our knees in 4.5 months. So the Americans are calculating that they can take a short-term pain and others will cave and make concessions to them. They're targeting Canada first because, as I've used this analogy before, it sends a signal to the rest of the world. They're negotiating through us to the rest of the world as much as they're negotiating with us. So there's this great Chinese proverb: you're being hassled by monkeys as a farmer. And you can't chase down every single monkey. So what do? You grab a chicken, you go out into the courtyard where the monkeys are gathered in the trees, and you gratuitously murder the chicken. You slaughter the chicken. The monkeys watching get the message. So by taking Canada and Mexico, two countries where the U.S. will be harmed the most, and making us examples up front, if they can get a quick win with us, then Ian's point, your point about restructuring the global economy becomes a little bit easier. Everyone realizes, holy bleep, not only does Trump have tariff power, but he just used it on Canada and Mexico. We better hustle to the negotiating table with, as the Chinese would say, a correct understanding of the situation.
Ian, do you think that our political leaders get the severity of the total threat, both the tariffs and these structural changes Trump wants to make?
I don't think so. I've been reading just about every word, at least that's reported publicly, because I'm not inside any of these circles. I've been reading the comments by Mr. Trudeau and by Chrystia Freeland, and I don't want to turn this into a pure partisan thing against the Liberals in Ottawa. I've been reading the comments by the Premier of Ontario, Premier Ford. And I have seen comments daily saying that to the effect, Trump's a bozo, the people around him are bozos, they don't even understand tariffs, they don't understand the impact, they don't even understand why they're doing it. In fact, Premier Ford said that, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly.
Carlo had a great line about that in his piece in the Financial Post. He described it as we're elite-splaining to the Americans instead of listening to what they're saying. And why I was so upset about that isn't because I'm here to defend Donald Trump. That's not my point at all. It just drives me mad. I mean, just absolutely bonkers when our leaders, we give them great privilege, great authority, controlling the bully pulpit. Well, the quid pro quo, just like giving a CEO a large salary, which I don't object to. But the quid pro quo is you got to deliver the bacon. You got to deliver the results. You got to win the Super Bowl if you're going to get paid $50 million a year as a quarterback. You're not getting paid that to be cute. You're being paid that to win. And we have leaders that don't even understand what's going on in the United States. They haven't even read this paper. They're oblivious to the arguments that are being developed that we've been discussing for the past 10, 15 minutes. There is no indication in anything that Premier Ford has said or that Mr. Trudeau has said or Chrystia Freeland has said that gives any flicker of recognition of what they are even trying to do. In fact, Ford said they don't need, he said that Trump just likes tariffs. He's just doing it because he likes tariffs. They have no understanding he's trying to reform the international system and that they have a very clear vision. Whether it's going to fructify in reality, I don't know, but they're not even aware that this is going on. And so they're willing and risking and threatening a trade war with the world hegemon that is over $25 trillion, and we are about $2.5 trillion, which I just think is madness on steroids, because we will lose. All right, we'll take a quick break here. When we come back, I want to get thoughts from both of you on what we could do. How we prepare. Do we need to make fundamental changes to how our economy works? More in moments. You've heard all the politicians talk about dollar-for-dollar tariff retribution. You've heard people say we have to retaliate in some way. Of course, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and Scott Moe disagree with that, on some level at least. Interesting column in the Globe and Mail the other day, though. Rob Carrick saying that we have to develop a Buy America personal plan, BYE America. He wants all Canadians to stop buying any American goods, don't travel to America, divest of any investments in the United States. Gents, I'll put it to you this way. I don't think that's a plausible program. And we are so intertwined with the United States. Nobody will have heard this, but before we started recording the podcast, we were all talking about the fact that Carlo's wearing a Philadelphia Eagles jersey and cheering for them this weekend, and Ian, you're cheering for Patrick Mahomes. I'm going out with to watch the Bills game with my buddies. We consume American culture. We consume a huge amount of their products, we couldn't do this. But what is the right solution? What should be a response? Carlo?
So the answer to that lies in Ian's previous comment. Have we engaged the new administration, meaning all the people that are becoming part of it, the work that was done to prepare for it? I agree with Ian. I have seen scant evidence of more than cursory reading of Lighthizer No Trade is Free Trade, a cursory glance at the work produced by American Compass or the American First Policy Institute. We did a deep dive at Canada West the same way I do a deep dive on the relevant parts of China's 5-year plan. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to agree with the administration that puts it out. But if it's going to impact Western Canadian interests, then I want to do a more than cursory examination of this. I don't think that we've done this. I hope to be proven wrong. I would love someone from Foreign Affairs to come on and to demonstrate, to provide evidence. But like Ian, I haven't seen that. So if we don't understand this, how do we formulate proper policies to protect Canadians? And look,
So they need to listen to this podcast, is what you're saying, and they need to read what you guys have been writing about this.
well, I'm not going to say that because I don't want anyone from Foreign Affairs to lose their lunch. But but no, you have to do that basic work. And when I was in Washington for the inauguration with Gary Marr, we went to the embassy and we saw a bunch of Canadians talking to a bunch of Canadians and Americans that work with Canada. But we were also at a reception that was, celebrating the Trump victory. A very, very right of center crowd, MAGA folks in the room. We weren't there to celebrate or to clink champagne glasses with them. We were there because these are the people we're going to have to deal with. So time and time again, and no one from the embassy was at this major reception.
It's why I give full credit to Premier Danielle Smith going down and meeting after meeting after meeting. Even a Mar-a-Lago, I heard it described in horrible terms. But, well, guess what? She actually had FaceTime with Trump more than once. She had FaceTime with Burgum and I believe it was Lutnick as well. I mean, these are important members of the administration that now have an eye-to-eye contact. And if you haven't done business in Washington with governments or think tanks or the media, I don't think Canadians get, networking is so much more important to Americans. And that personal contact is hugely important. And once you get it, they're willing to, oh, yeah, I remember meeting you. Let's do a deal.
And that's why we spend so much time in the States at the provincial and federal level. But the other point with Danielle Smith is she's, to my mind, following the playbook written by former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Now, during the first Trump administration, I was appalled at what Abe did. I wrote about how terrible it was, and then I spent 3 years eating crow.
Tell me about the golf clubs.
Yes, it wasn't just the golf clubs. I didn't understand how the Japanese could look at themselves in the mirror. But again, like I said, I spent 3 years eating crow, and I see
because it worked for him.
Following the example that you said, we may not like it, but the job of a premier or political leader is not to do what you like. It's to do what's necessary to defend and advance the interest of your jurisdiction within obvious moral and other parameters. But in terms of the response, very quickly, we wrote over the summer that we needed to begin to prepare for the tariffs. Survey businesses. Where are they most exposed? What are businesses thinking? What mechanisms do we have in terms of provincial or federal capacity to be able to mitigate some of the damages? We know that the U.S. Department of Agriculture cut $28 billion U.S. in checks to U.S. farmers to compensate for damages in the trade war with China from Chinese retaliation. What are we going to do for Canadian producers and Canadian exporters? What could we learn from other jurisdictions? What's worked in Canada where we've had natural disasters or economic shocks? This work needed to be done as soon as we knew that Trump clinched, but we didn't. We did spend a lot of time in the States, which was necessary, but we didn't do the other half of the job, which is why you see people scrambling now. All these crazy ideas are coming out. We've waited until it's already occurred, and we're suddenly desperate and scrambling for options as opposed to having prepared. And we had plenty of warning. Heck, if I could see this, I'm not the smartest guy out there. If I could see this, some of those geniuses at Foreign Affairs certainly should have seen it coming.
Ian, what levers, what actions? I mean, beyond, as you've both said, actually understanding what they're doing and why. What do we do? How do we respond?
I actually think the roadmap is very, very clear because the data on the public record is. I've been reading the U.S. Trade Rep report, which is tabled in Congress every year since the Clinton years. That's a third of a century ago. And they list all the countries of the world alphabetically, and then they list the trade irritants with each country. And the list for Canada, so I'm just going to talk about Canada. That list has been very, very consistent from then until now under successive American presidents. They are really opposed to supply management. They're completely opposed to the the Telecom Act that prohibits American companies from coming in, like Verizon and AT&T. They don't like the protectionisms in the Bank Act. I won't go through the whole list. The list is there. Every president has raised it. Obama came to Parliament and he actually talked about this list and he said, but we like you, you're good people, you're our best friend, so we're not going to pursue it. Trump came along and said, I'm not going to accept that. So we know the shopping list that Mr. Trump wants us to change. So what we should be doing, I'm answering your question. Mm-hmm. To me, it's this, we should be pounding the table instead of threatening a trade war that we will get squashed like a bug on a windshield in the summertime. We should be pounding the table saying we want to renegotiate the CUSMA agreement and we want to start Monday morning. And we will put all of our sacred cows on the table, the 6 or 7 protected industries, and we want you to drop and give us guarantees you'll drop all of these tariffs. And if the paper written by Stephen Marin certainly suggests that. He doesn't put it quite as baldly as I just did, but he said there's things that Canada is protecting and other countries are protecting their countries from American firms coming in. And he says that's got to end or we will put tariffs on them and raise them if they retaliate. So to me, it's as clear as can be in that document, the Marin paper. And what we have to do is immediately move to, and Trump offered it just the other day, yesterday, start negotiating a new CUSMA and put all those sacred cows, all 5 or 6 or 7 of them, on the table and get rid of them.
It's funny that you're saying that to fight back against American protectionism, we have to get rid of our own protectionism. Look, all countries are hypocrites on trade. It's why Lighthizer book is called "No Trade is Free." We have managed trade, but Izzy Asper, when he was still alive and owned Global, he also owned stations in the United States, in Australia. We go around the world and we buy up industries in other countries that nobody's allowed to come and buy here. Carlo, I saw you shaking your head as Ian was talking. Do you agree with him or disagree?
Yeah, it's my turn to disagree with Ian. And let me give you the example of the first shot Trump fired, fentanyl and immigration. And I think it was a mistake to respond the way we did. I'll explain in a second. But to my mind, there was only one response to what Trump said, and 3 parts. First, we hear you. We understand. Second, we're here with our sleeves rolled up and our checkbook out. We're not just talking or blowing smoke. Sleeves rolled up, checkbooks here. We got a pen in hand. Now, tell us exactly what more you want us to do that we're not already doing. Instead, what we did was suddenly start throwing things on the table. Mr. Trump, do you want this? Mr. Trump, how about more trips to the border? Mr. Trump will send sheriffs to the border. Mr. Trump will buy helicopters. We don't know what of what we've just thrown on the table is going to move him. There's been a lot written by a lot of people in America first about what's wrong and what's needed. But with Donald Trump, I want to hear from him exactly what he wants so we can negotiate knowing that we will at least meet what he has just told us he wants, not a tweet he dropped 2 weeks ago or something someone in the administration wrote 6 months ago.
Well,
We've got
Brian,
now
I'm worried
with Trump.
Brian, I always want to get my point across because my point is now being misrepresented. I never said let's throw all these up at him before we even start to negotiate. Of course not. Anybody who knows anything about negotiations, and I'm on the union, believe it or not, of my faculty where I'm unionized. Okay,
Well,
and we're in
we just did that with the response to the threat on fentanyl and immigration. We just did that.
Yeah, I'm not. That's not my position. I'm saying we've got to start negotiations and say we've got to talk to them like Danielle Smith is doing. We want to talk to the people around Trump, and we've got to start negotiations, not offering anything up at the beginning, saying, what is it you want from us? Is it 2% of defense spending?
That's my point.
Is it
Yes.
protective industries? Then we start wheeling and dealing and negotiating. I'll give you this if you give me that. I'm not suggesting ever that you offer up all kinds of concessions before the negotiations start. That is not negotiations, at least as I understand.
that is capitulation.
But that is what we've done, and that's the response in Canada to some degree. Let's just meet with Trump, and we don't really understand exactly what he wants, and he'll change his mind. He'll change his mind 3 times in a day. So this isn't a normal negotiation. We're dealing with someone who will renege on what he said, openly contradict himself in public. This is a very, very difficult task. And I don't think we can make it seem simple that we just sit down at the table and negotiate. This isn't a typical negotiation with a typical partner.
Let me cut in again. First off, Trump expressly delegated responsibility to the Cantor Fitzgerald CEO, who is now the Secretary of Commerce. And he expressly gave him responsibility for negotiations and for tariffs. So I don't think that Mr. Trump is going to be at the negotiating table. He's rather busy as the president. He's going to have a bunch of bureaucrat professional negotiators as well as the cabinet secretary, and they're going to come back with some kind of a package, an up-down, do you approve this, Mr. Trump, or not? I don't think he's going to be micromanaging the negotiations. He's going to be way too busy dealing with all the other things that are on the desk of the President of the United States. So he
cares too much about this. On things where Trump doesn't care, he delegates more. On things that are personally important to him, he meddles a lot more. With the first administration, he started out with Wilbur Wright running trade policy. That lasted until Robert Lighthizer took over. So this can change within the administration too. It's just a lot more fraught, I think, than what we're used to in dealing with Americans, where there's a lot more consistency, rigor in the process. Now, for some areas where Trump doesn't care, agricultural policy, sure, he'll just dictate that out, and chances of his issuing a tweet midway through are slim. But with areas we really care, security, going after the intelligence establishment, and trade, there's a higher degree of probability. I'm not saying it's absolutely certain. Everything is probabilistic. And your probability of Trump interfering with trade is higher. It's not 100%, but it's higher than, say, with agriculture, where the probability of his interfering is probably a lot lower.
One of the things that disturbs me is, and this speaks to the fact that our administration, our governments collectively, aren't engaged with the Americans, aren't listening to what they're saying, don't understand, is when Trump said, you got to stop the migrants coming across the border and the fentanyl, the immediate reaction is, we're not the problem. What are you talking about? And Justin Trudeau is still going around and saying less than 1% come from Canada of the people crossing illegally into the United States. The Americans publish this data. And they're far more open with their government data than we are. And it's readily available. You can go on to the Customs and Border Patrol website, look up how many come across total. It's over about 2 million. How many at Mexico? How many at Canada? Last year, we were about 7% of the problem. We were not less than 1%. And we're growing. When I spoke to Premier Smith in December, I asked her about fentanyl because everyone says, well, only 43 pounds seized. And she said, fentanyl is a growing problem, especially in Alberta and British Columbia, being shipped down to the U.S. So she's the only politician I've spoken to or heard from that actually wanted to acknowledge that there was a problem. So, if we're not engaging with them on that, not hearing what they're saying, there's no way that we're going to be doing that on trade.
But the larger issue I want to get across, and maybe there's a disagreement here. I don't look. You are much more plugged into the Americans than I am, but I just don't think the president is going to be able to. There's an awful lot of things that are on the job of any president every day of the week. Events, dear man, events, and that famous quote of the British Prime Minister. I think what Trump is doing is, and it's in The Art of the Deal, which I did read. He is softening us up using his tweets and his public comments. But once they sit down to negotiations, he's already delegated it to the Commerce Secretary, who's a very, very competent, extraordinarily accomplished CEO who turned around and saved Cantor Fitzgerald after it was wiped out by 9/11 when they lost 85 or 90% of their employees. And he's a very bright guy, and he's going to have his team of negotiators. And then they're going to get into all of the intricacies of this. And then there's going to be a package deal that they bring back. And in the paper I keep quoting, Marin said very clearly, explicitly, they want to use the tariffs to get countries to open up those protected industries. That's what he said. I'm not saying it. That's what he said. And he said, if they do, we will drop the tariff. So I'm just quoting you what the chief economist to President Trump
fair point.
said.
Now, I'll end on this. I want to be respectful of both of your time, but I want to ask you about the setup of Canada's economy. We don't have a functional government right now. We've got one guy that said he's resigning, who has no respect from Trump. We've got Mark Carney, who resigned as the UN climate change special rapporteur and the head of the financial asset managers net zero program. We've got Chrystia Freeland. They're all wedded to an ideology that is slowing down our economy. Do we have the right team in place? Are we headed towards the right team? To me, it looks like the Liberals are sleepwalking into putting Mark Carney in as leader, which makes him our prime minister. And folks might think that's great. He's an economist, so he knows better. I know too many economists to think that automatically makes you a genius. We're still on a policy of emissions caps on oil and gas. We're still on a policy of Bill C-69. We're still on a policy of taxing people who build businesses with the capital gains tax changes. We seem to be going in the exact opposite direction. Donald Trump wants to unleash his economy, and we're still with Justin Trudeau trying to shackle us down. If it, what's the old saying? If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, all of that. We're still in that mentality. Your thoughts on what we need to do, Carlo?
So, we're in the worst possible position imaginable. We've lost trust in the Federation. And with Justin Trudeau and the list of grievances that we have, especially here out west, there could be no trust. It's broken, and that put us in a bad negotiating position. When the government launched their Team Canada approach, they did it in Montreal at a Liberal meeting. They announced a Quebec MP and an Ontario MP to lead this. They had a speaker, Flavio Volpe, from Ontario, and the head of Caisse de Dépôt in Quebec. I mean, you started out by giving the middle finger to Western Canada with your announcement of a Team Canada approach. And it's gone downhill from there. We've got a leader who's forgotten but not yet gone running the country. You can thank Gary Moore for that quote. So we're just in a worst possible position. I also don't see the opposition being prepared for this. Now, we've commented a lot about government not doing things, no evidence of the government contacting the America First movement or knowing things. That's public evidence. That's the fault. If the government has done something, it's the fault of foreign affairs and the government for not having made public or communicated to people. And it's not just me that hasn't seen it. I'm part of an experts working group on North America, former ambassadors, Perrin Beatty, and others, and they haven't seen it either. So it also applies to the Conservatives, though. I have yet to see evidence in public that the conservatives are prepared to take over the North America file. We've had a couple of statements by Pierre Poilievre. He's done well, but I haven't seen real substance behind that from the conservatives. So I'm not sure that they're ready to axe the tax, build the homes. What else is it?
They're still on the old slogans, and they need something new.
I haven't seen any evidence. I hope to God I'm wrong and that it's there, but they've done a piss poor job of communicating, so I don't have confidence that things are going to get better.
Ian, you live in the Ottawa bubble. That place seems to be in love with Mark Carney at the moment. He's an economist. Look, I've met him. I've covered him. He's a very nice man. But is he the right guy? Are these the policies that will save us? Or do you agree with me that they're exactly the wrong policies?
I not only think they're the wrong policies, I'll go further than you. I'm much more cynical, maybe because I've lived in Ottawa all my life. I deeply believe that the Liberals see this as an opportunity, a Hail Mary, to stay in power. They're going to run against Donald Trump. They're going to use the tariffs as the excuse to do what Liberals like to do, which is tax and spend and subsidize and protect. So they are already working on plans to save all kinds of industries from who? From the tariffs and Donald Trump. And so I'm much more cynical than you are. I think they're going to, that's why they're not talking about negotiating a new CUSMA agreement. The last thing they want is a CUSMA agreement that's going to take the tariffs off the table and then take away their one possible driving force that will allow them to be reelected. I think that they have a plan to put Carney the elites are in the Liberal Party, from everything I'm hearing in Ottawa, are coming together behind Carney. He's going to be their great savior, and they're going to run on an anti-Trump. He's going to save the Liberal Party, is going to paint this as saving Canada from the Americans and from Donald Trump, and they're going to try and paint Poilievre and the Conservatives in that with that paint. In other words, they're going to give up on, that they're going to bring back abortion and the other social conservative issues. They now have their new hot issue to label the Conservatives as sellouts and vendus who are going to be on the side of the Trumpian Americans, and they're going to try and use that they're going to do a Captain Canada. We're going to save Canada from not only Donald Trump and the big bad Americans, but we're going to save them, the Canadians, from the Conservatives. And that's why we haven't heard very much. I am absolutely certain that Poilievre and his people are working night and day trying to figure out feverishly how can they come up with a policy that is not what the Liberals are doing, at the same time that won't be seen or perceived as being in the pocket of Donald Trump. And that's why I think we've heard so little from the Conservatives right now, but I do believe they will come up with something, and I still think it has to be something along the line of a CUSMA agreement. It's hard for the Liberals to walk away from a CUSMA agreement when they negotiated the last one with Donald Trump. So I think that's going to be the opening, if there is an opening, but the Liberals are going to run against Trump. I don't think they want the tariffs to come to an end. I'm that cynical about the Liberals. Their goal is the re-election of the Liberal Party, not to save Canada from Donald Trump.
Man, I thought I was dark. Wow.
I got to say, they're
telling them your direction, Ian. I just don't see it from the Conservatives. The plans are there. We've done significant work on trade infrastructure, and Brian, you and I have talked about the trade infrastructure file. There are plans. Everyone knows what needs to be done. I hope to God you're right, Ian. I hope to God that they are doing this, but they've got to demonstrate more than hope, of course they're doing it. They've got to go beyond axe the tax and other things and show us that they're actually, they don't have to give us specific plans. Just give us something
that shows that they've thought about it.
That you're working on this. Something other than a slogan to show us that you're working on this, please. Don't be specific. Don't hang yourself in public. Just, for God's sake, give us something.
To show that Ian is likely right, let me just point out that the Liberals are already trying to tie Pierre Poilievre to Donald Trump by pointing out that Elon Musk has liked some of Poilievre's statements. I mean, the fact that they're doing it on X, the platform owned by Elon Musk, and saying how evil Elon Musk is, why are you with him? It's a little bit silly, but that's the state of Canadian politics. Gentlemen, it's been a great discussion, and you've both raised some things that I'm going to be looking up, papers to read and things to think about. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libben is the executive producer. Remember to hit that subscribe button for Full Comment, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, wherever. Hit subscribe and help us out. Leave a rating, give us a review, tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.